Last night I finished watching Rent-A-Girlfriend. It took some time. I slugged behind a little bit, but I did finally finish it. Not that I didn't enjoy it or anything, I just had some things on my plate, so I'm a little late to the game. However, I thought it was pretty good, despite all the polarizing reviews and feedback that I've read on the internet. So without further ado, let's just dive right in and see what's what. I'm going to start off with the art and character design, seeing as how that's what made me check out the show in the first place. Is it just me, or are Slice of Life's getting more and more colorful? I'm all for it. Loads of candy-like hues and crisp lines. This one is clearly no slouch. Obviously, consistency is easier when you don't have a bunch of demigods kicking the shit out of each other every episode, but I'm impressed nonetheless. I would say, given the heavy presence of ultra kawaii, protect at all costs characters, the visual theme feels very gal girl, lollipops in arcades, etc., etc. My one and only nitpick is some of the side context script that pops up throughout the show during slapstick moments. Sometimes it added an extra funny side note, sometimes it was just rephrasing what they were already saying in that moment, making it more of a pointless distraction. Thankfully, this was rare enough that I gave up trying to find an example, so it truly is the tiniest of nitpicks. With that one gripe aside, I'll move on to one little thing I really loved. The lips. In up-close shots of the girls, they retain the classic line work for this style's lips, but add an extra dimension by contouring the fullness of said lip with shine. Most of the time you can assume they're wearing lip gloss, so it's rather appropriate if not practical. Next up is the story. As the name implies, the concept of renting a girl for a role-play type date is the jumping off point. We start with a main character who is wallowing in self-pity over being recently and unceremoniously dumped by his girlfriend. From an objective stance, it doesn't seem like there's much ground laid between them to begin with, so it's pretty clear this incident isn't going to be the focus of the MC's journey. Enter the fabled dating app that promises a fun, charming time with a professional rental girlfriend. Our MC books a date in an attempt to distract himself from his heartache. In doing so, he meets his foil and new interest for the ongoing narrative. The date plays out, some more developments occur to close the gap between these two characters, and we hit the ground running. Now, this may seem like typical harem and ecchi fodder, and I suppose it is. Yet there happens to be a lot bubbling below the surface. The whole rental girlfriend thing speaks to a rather known issue in Japan, regarding loneliness, isolation, and a trend of male inability to come out of one's shell in organic circumstances. There is evidence that a lot of youth today are simply uninterested in sex and relationships, seeing that side of life as troublesome and not worth the effort, especially in the face of academic and career pressure. This, of course, does not touch on Japan alone. Other male attitudes on display in the show hearken to the now commonly known incel movement, more publicly prevalent in North American and European communities. There are always exceptions to trends like these, so we're left to assume these characters represent the small percentage that are interested enough to actively pursue the opposite sex. This balks in the face of Japan's declining birth rate stats, with their flagrant displays of lust and libido. Please don't hate me for the continuity error. But yeah, lust and libido. Speaking of those two things, that's something that actually really caught me by surprise with this show. I mean, I knew there was going to be a bit of ecchi and whatnot, but I really didn't expect them to just double down on the amount of stuff it shows the main character doing. Not that it's odd for someone of his age, it's just, those are some behind the scenes, behind closed doors behaviors of your average late teen, early 20s male. I mean, for God's sakes, it's constantly showing the guy jerking it to every second thought he has of whatever girl crosses his path that smells like strawberries.
But you love to see it, don't you?
I don't know. It is what it is. Ultimately, I just thought it was something funny to point out. Moving on. Implied in the credits, the MC doesn't meet with just one rental girlfriend. Throughout the season, we're introduced to several more female characters that help keep the story fresh and add new layers and complications. Let's segue into the final part of this video, the characters that drive the story. I won't be covering them in order of appearance, it'll be more along the lines of relevance to the main character. And speaking of the main character, we have Kazuya. Whoa, whoops, wrong Kazuya. No, that would have made for a drastically different anime. Instead, we get this guy. The anime community's disdain for this character is palpable, to put it mildly. There are plenty of genre tropes that supply the architecture for an MC being generally insufferable, and I've certainly seen my share. This guy can be pretty pathetic, and as I mentioned before, some of his private actions and inner monologues don't really help his image. I got very frustrated watching him throughout this season, and I want to point out the core of what made me dislike him: his inconsistency with ethics and motive. The way Kazuya justifies telling self-destructive lies to his grandmother to protect her feelings, yet has no issue flip-flopping between the object of his affection for the perks of a relationship, made me want to put my head through a wall. To save on some painful exposition, I'll just say this is highlighted by his behavior with Mami, Chizuru, and Ruka throughout the first half of the season. It makes him look selfish, ignorant, and flagrantly immature. But, to be fair, I figured it had to be this way to start, at least. He is a horny 19-year-old after all. His character development is barely noticeable, but it is there in the later episodes, with signs that he will grow more throughout the series. This gives me hope for the show moving forward, and I will admit I swore an oath to myself that I would drop the show if the character's maturity stayed the same for the sake of jokes. I do also want to point out how nice it was to have Kazuya's one friend act as sort of the audience's mouthpiece. My god, was he an essential buffer in that beach episode. Next up, I'd like to address Sumi. She appears late in the season, and for now is a bottle episode character. Chizuru sets her up with Kazuya for a training date of sorts, since her crippling shyness has proven troublesome for her success as a rental. She's outrageously adorable, but there really isn't much else to say. I get the feeling that her name is a bit of a pun on her personality as well, her being the shy, apologetic type. I'm sure we'll get to see more of her in Season 2. I bet you can smell it. You can smell it in the air. Who's next? Yeah, it's her. Mami-chan. Yeah, that one. Probably one of the most important characters in the show so far, and from a psychological standpoint, I'm equal parts disturbed by this character and kind of pleased that she's even in this series. We do need a character like this to make these things more interesting. That whole dead eyes thing, that's not just some trope. That is a really good visual to kind of convey to the viewer what type of person you're looking at. And the psychology here isn't anything particularly new, but within slice of life, comedy, romance, anime, I don't think I've ever seen a character done like this. It's almost like you've got like a horror element lurking in the background. I remember reading a lot of comments on Crunchyroll after the first couple episodes regarding Mami. And I feel like there's a lot of people that have not yet figured out who in their circle of friends or just peers in general has this kind of perspective, mental state. I'm not even really sure yet because they haven't really unpacked anything from her perspective. However, that's the thing. It's easy for someone like this to go unrecognized in a friend circle because quite honestly, they're doing their damnedest to just act normal, fit in, and present themselves as expected. I get the feeling that this character, there's a lot more to go on than just what's shown, her being kind of like a villain. I kind of hope they do get to that later. Right now, there's just the meme.
Mommy belongs in the streets.
Like, yes, that's funny and everything, but I don't know. I think this kind of character is important and interesting, not just, the one that you shouldn't be waifuing for or whatever. Without her presence, I don't think the show would be nearly as interesting. And some of the stuff towards the end of it as well, like, yeah, she's pretty slimy and comes off as a little bit of a sociopath. But, we'll just have to wait and see what her deal is. There isn't much else to say about her other than, ugh, she gives me the heebie-jeebies, man. Ooh. Yeah. Moving on, man. Aw, look who it is. It's Ruka. Ruka-chan. Man, I feel like her initial archetype does a disservice to her as a three-dimensional character. Despite coming off as the annoying, clingy type, I find her side of the story to be rather sad. She is earnestly going after someone she's interested in, and maybe going about it in a way that's a little intense at times, but I think most of her appearing as clingy and whatnot is because she's presented through the lens of Kazuya. At first, he doesn't take her seriously and applies his own backwards reasoning to her by marking her as physically alluring, but otherwise a nuisance. Once again, he justifies all this by telling himself he's looking out for the feelings of another, in this case his friend, who has just as much of a claim to her as any other client she may have had previously. It's his friend's own fault if he can't grasp the reality of their relationship as truly business-oriented. And let's be real, Kazuya is really just writing her off to keep his lane clear for another particular rental girl that he has his eye on. I think Ruka is easily the second best character, and despite where the story is obviously going, I find myself rooting for her. She's discovering new things about herself and her feelings, facing them head on, trying to be practical and fair, and that kind of stuff isn't easy, and she's doing the best she can. She does make choices that favor her desired outcome, and it may stir the pot a little, but I can't help but be okay with it, especially in the face of Kazuya's choices. Watch the show for yourself, and you'll see that a lot of her straight talk is some of the most reasonable in the show, as applied to Kazuya and Mizuhara's situation. Even Mizuhara herself can't help but recognize the legitimacy of her position and logic. Hang in there, Ruka-chan. I bet you can recall how I just mentioned that Ruka is my second favorite character. Well, now we arrive at my favorite character, the S-tier waifu herself, the one that unwittingly summoned an army of simps, just by simply being herself. Chizuru Ichinose, more commonly referred to by a rental handle, Chizuru Mizuhara. Beauty, brains, and an empath who takes no shit. This girl is very well written. In my opinion, she's perfect because she's not perfect. For all the positive attributes she displays, she occasionally shows a lapse in foresight, not often to anyone's detriment but her own. And, dare I say, these lapses are likely due to her blind spot, which I believe to be her own feelings. She reflexively puts herself in the shoes of others, despite putting on a front of indifference or annoyance at times. She comes off as a tsundere of sorts, but this goes out the window once you're shown some continuity with how she digests and considers the actions of those around her. Past her knee-jerk reactions, she's ultimately looking out for everyone's well-being. This is what supports her own justification for going along with the farce that is her romantic relation with Kazuya. Kazuya's errant behavior is constantly drawing out her brash and aggressive side, resulting in some funny moments between the two. In the long run, her kindness and compassion foster an arguably misplaced level of patience with Kazuya. I find this interesting because you could easily debate this as either a weakness or a strength on her part. If we're putting her best interests first, then it's easy to say she's going out of her way at the expense of maintaining peace of mind. Sure, she makes money off these dates, but it becomes clear very early that isn't her reason for helping Kazuya. I think the reason I love this character so much is her being well-rounded in the sense that she stands up for herself in a firm way, without hesitation, yet is also looking to recognize the best in the person next to her, despite how immature and annoying they might be. She has all the reason in the world to leave Kazuya to his stupidity without any insight or help, but she just can't. It's not in her nature to turn someone away if she feels she can truly be of help or offer her 2 cents towards their growth. I don't want to go any further into analyzing her because I would have to start dredging up some story beats that I don't want to blatantly spoil. I'll just finish by saying she reminds me of Neru Narisugawa from Love Hina. One main difference is she uses her words more than her fists to reprimand the MC for his actions. And of course, this show has more plot than ecchi, so there's that too. So this show ended up being quite a pleasant surprise for me. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much going into it. Kind of figured it was going to be by the numbers. In some ways it was, but I was also pleasantly surprised with a few shocks.
Mommy.
But you know, aside from the obvious, I think this is going to go somewhere interesting. I don't think it's necessarily going to fall into some tropes or maybe overstay its welcome. That being said, I would give this an objective 8 out of 10. I think this is a great starter anime for anyone who hasn't really watched much slice of life or rom-com. This is a great example that even though the word romance is tacked onto it, you know, you're still going to get a lot of laughs, interesting plot developments, etc. Subjectively though, I'd give this a 7 out of 10 for me. I have watched a decent amount of slice of life, I would say, and again, there weren't that many new things, enough to keep me engaged, but I do truly see that score maybe going up a bit. But of course, I need to see those developments before I can give it a higher score. So for now, for me, it's a 7 out of 10. I'm expecting that to go up in the future. Anyway, like and subscribe if you liked it, but more importantly, leave a comment. Let's start a conversation. I'd rather hear what you guys have to say about this show. Peace.